So I'm going to do something on tool sheds and light maintenance buildings. What I found was interesting was I did a Google search for maintenance buildings on railroads, and I hardly got any photographs. I wanted to see. Um, I did all kinds of Google searches. I did light maintenance shops, railroads, light. I just kept searching, and there were hardly any photographs. So then I concluded that if you're a rail fan, the last thing in your mind is to take a photograph of a shack or a shed or a small office. Everybody's after the Hollywood shot, the big station, the depot, some big coaling facility or a steel mill or a bridge, but nobody takes the lonely little maintenance shop, the little sheds that sprinkle a freight yard and or around their roundhouses or engine houses. And so I'm going to go through a few of them. A light maintenance shop is they just do light, they have tools in there, hand tools and things, just so they can do some quick repairs on rolling stock and whatnot. A yard office gives a place for people to hide out in inclement weather. Um, I did find a couple photographs of speeder car sheds, um, which which I guess I would expect. Um, and every time I did one of these searches, I got a lot of models, even though I specifically said I wanted, um, the prototype or real. I didn't have model in my search. 75% of my shed, shelter, speeder car searches had models in them, which I really didn't want to feature because I wanted to show the prototypes. Um, these are a couple examples. Sometimes they use old rail cars, they put windows and doors on them. But and what I'm trying to show here is on your layout, um, these are one or two evening projects to scratch build. And there are people that sell them like kit makers, but they're really easy to make and they should be sprinkled all over your layout. These little sheds, little tool sheds, they add a depth of realism that seldom photographed, but should be frequently modeled. The classic of all the searches, I found only two prototype pictures of rail cars being used for storage, but I found a dearth of models. People love to take a out of service boxcar or something they never quite ran very well and turn it into a storage unit. So it's alive and well in modeling, but not on the Google searches. So this is an example of a shed that was made for my model railroad, my McCoy camp. You can't see it in this picture, but it's made from scrap from an old rail car. So all the colors of and that's why I'm showing it. So all the boards on this little shack are the theory is taken from an abandoned rail car, and that's why I featured this. That's sort of an extreme there. That's not what I'm really about this evening. This is a kit from Foggy Mountain Structures that I kit bashed and featured a couple years ago on New Tracks Live. Um, this is theoretically made out of a refrigerator car and a freight car where they've put windows on it and a door and a platform. Um, this is a ready available kit, but this is more elaborate than what I'm talking about this evening. What I really want to talk about are little shack-like or small little buildings. I mean, this is so small it almost looks like an outhouse, which it isn't. Not entirely sure what it is, but I wanted two small structures uh, in this particular area of my layout, and that was one of them that I scratch built. This one's a little larger. This one is a tool shed where basically they just keep hand tools in there. And this is what I'm going to feature tonight, how I built this in 2 evenings. And these can be sprinkled all over your layout. Um, they're easy to build. They can be made of scrap wood and they can be highly detailed. So this is the build process. They that is basically all the main components required to do a small tool shed. This is a Tichy door, and these windows are actually HO scale. I wanted some small windows, and then the siding is just either northeastern scale lumber or one of the suppliers is just vertical uh, siding. The thing to take note here is this is a little takeaway. See this notch that I put in here? That's because these Tichy or Grant Line have a little extension off the door, and if you don't notch it, it doesn't fit flush. So always remember to notch it. And look how simple this thing is. 4 pieces of wood, 4 windows, and a door. I always write on the back of these the difference between up or down. I used to not do that, and then if there was a difference in the height from the base of the structure to the first window, I'd have one window that would be at say 2 feet, another window would be 2.5 feet. So I always label these after I put them together. And then this is that 1/4 inch material that I use for everything for strengthening the outside wall. So it's just simple, my typical construction. I use super glue and with these 1/4 inch pieces of wood on there, it's very easy to just glue the first wall on and put a square on there, make sure it squares up. Everything I build, you have to pay attention to keeping everything in square. If you don't, things simply don't fit right. Everything I do is just as square as it could possibly be. So on the left there, you see the built up 4 walls and the 1/4 inch material in the corners to reinforce it. Now I'm getting ready for additional reinforcement. This stuff, 1/4 inch material, is so inexpensive. As I've said in many presentations, doesn't cost you really anything to make it last forever. It'll never warp. So there I've boxed in the ceiling and the floor. Now I've got a very robust structure here. Oop, sorry. Oh, going the wrong way. There we go. Sorry. So it's very strong and it's never going to warp. It's all super glued together. Now I like to use different materials to give a little variety to the look of the building. It adds visual interest. So this is a shingled material from Larkspur Monster Works. I had a small piece here, and I just with a ruler just drew it out on the back, and then I cut it out with a X-Acto, and mouse is so sensitive. And then I just glued that right on top of the piece there, and I see how it's extending out from the left and right of the building. That way, the runoff doesn't run down the side of the building, and we'll cover the other part on the roof. Very simple construction. And then to keep those triangles, those roof from warping, I put this. That looks like I use balsa wood. Anytime I can burn up what balsa wood I have left, I use it. So I put a piece of balsa wood in there and super glued it in place to keep the integrity of these front and rear pieces high. There's another view of it. Then you can see on the end, I put, again, this is just scrap wood. So when you look up from the bottom of this in a photograph, you're not seeing sky. So in other words, see how this extends outward here? Um, by just putting a couple pieces of wood in there, now you don't see, now there's not a vacant space there. I took a piece of blue painter's tape. I stuck my 4 HO scale windows on there and my Tichy or Grantline door, and then I sprayed it with my Tamaya light gray non-filling primer. And then I began hand painting it with craft paint. As I said before, I paint the interiors with an inexpensive flat craft paint because I don't normally detail the interiors. The colors of my railroad for maintenance buildings and stations and things are this yellow green. These are the base colors, as I refer to as obnoxious at this point. They're very bright, very bold. These are, a dollar, dollar and a half a bottle. It's just craft paint. I did not bother priming this. I just painted it straight up, the wood. Sort of a leap here, but I started putting on the trim. This is just 1x4 material. And then I put this little accent on here. This is a 2x6. Just add a little detail to this thing, just some visual interest. So you've got the shingles up here, the vertical siding here, the two-tone color, and then I'm trimmed it out. It takes no time at all to do this and adds a nice little interest to it. You might say it's a little elaborate for a tool building, but that's what I wanted. The roof is tar paper. This is the something that I can't remember the Creek models. They don't make it anymore. I just Xerox it, make a copy on my laser or my inkjet printer, and just cut it out and glue it on there with Elmer's glue. I've demonstrated that technique many times.
I think it was Stony Creek.
Stony Creek, that's it, correct. Which is, I wish he would have sold those files to somebody because this stuff's gorgeous. And I filled the windows with an acetate in the back, and I've sprayed them with dull coat on the inside. That looks a little chalky on the right. That'll go away in a minute, but you can see the before and after. I got a little carried away with the dusting, but it'll with dull coat it washed out to the right hue. Just different views. This was 2 evenings of work. And there's where it goes on the layout. So this is that little tool shed. Not entirely sure what this is. Has a nice little smokestack there. That's a brass tube, a little piece of 040 plastic and some cotton. Um, but this without these two little buildings, I mean, there was literally nothing there but scenery, and it really adds to the scene. And if you say to yourself, once a month I'm going to do a 2 evening project and put in a little building somewhere in the layout, before you know it, you have all these little buildings everywhere. It really adds visual interest to the layout and helps make the scene. There's the overall scene with with these two little buildings. And I've said this before about my modeling. I do what's called a layering process. I start with the track, then I start with the tunnels, and I just keep adding and adding and adding and adding till you get saturation of super detailing. And it doesn't happen overnight. This takes like a couple months of work or so, but you just keep adding and adding and a layering process. And before you know it, you get something that looks like this. Visual interests here, a camp, railroad workers, just little neat things all over the layout, thorough weathering everywhere. Ed Holmes boarding house. He's in a new business here. Um,
Everything you do tells a story.
that's correct. And the more detail you have, the more stories you can tell with your eyes. I've only had maybe a half a dozen visitors to the layout, but one thing they always walk away with is when they see a detailed scene like that, I catch them standing there and watching and looking at it, and looking and looking and looking, because the more you put on there, the more there is to see.